I was standing before the full court with the king's letter shaking in my own 2 hands, 3 sentences from the end, and every single person in that hall already knew exactly what the last line said except me, because I was the only one who had not yet let myself believe it. King Sigurd knelt at the foot of the dais, his wolf pressed warm against my skirts as though it had personally arranged the whole absurd scene, and I understood, looking at his face, that I had been asked to translate my own proposal in front of an audience because the man kneeling before me had never once, in his entire disastrous plan, considered that this might be a spectacularly poor way to ask a woman to marry him. But that is very near the end of it, and a woman who tells you the ending before she has earned it deserves to be turned off. Let me go back 3 days. To a sealed letter and a scribe's summons I very nearly declined. I am Isolde, and I am a scholar of the old northern dialects, a peculiar, unglamorous trade for an omega with no bloodline standing, but one I have practiced since I was old enough to hold a quill, having learned it from my own grandmother, who learned it from a scholar's household she once served in her youth. Few people in the Iron Territories still read the old tongue fluently. Fewer still care to, since it fell entirely out of common use 2 generations ago, kept alive now only in old land grants, ancient treaties, and the occasional stubborn family record too proud to be recopied in modern speech. I made a small, steady living translating whatever old documents the Crown's archives occasionally required, and I had never once, in 3 years of that quiet work, been summoned to the royal scribe's own chambers for a personal commission. I was summoned there on an ordinary gray morning, and I assumed, walking to the fortress with my satchel of reference texts, that some ancient boundary dispute or forgotten treaty had surfaced requiring my particular narrow expertise. The royal scribe, a nervous, precise man named Bran, met me at the door with an expression I could not quite read, and handed me a single sealed letter. Its wax an unusual deep blue I had never seen used on any official document before. His Grace requests this translated aloud, in full, before him, Bran said, and something in his careful, over-formal phrasing struck me, even then, as strange. He was quite specific that it be you, Mistress Isolde, and no other linguist in the territories. I thought nothing of the specificity at the time. I assumed, if I thought of it at all, that my reputation for careful, precise work had simply reached the Crown's own ear, which was flattering enough on its own, and I broke the seal and began to read the old dialect script within, translating aloud as I went the way I always did for any commission, my voice settling into the familiar, comfortable rhythm of a trade I had practiced for years. It began ordinarily enough, a formal greeting in the old style, the kind of elaborate courtly address the ancient dialect favored for any letter of consequence, the sort of language I had translated 100 times before for old land grants and forgotten treaties. I read it aloud without particular alarm, my eyes moving ahead of my voice the way a practiced translator's always does. And it was somewhere in the 3rd sentence that my eyes, running ahead, caught the shape of a word I recognized with a jolt that stopped my voice entirely mid-syllable. The old dialect's formal address for a marriage proposal is a specific, unmistakable construction, unused in any other context, a phrase I had encountered perhaps twice before in my whole career. In centuries-old betrothal contracts, long since irrelevant to anyone living. I had just read it aloud, in the present tense, in a letter sealed that very week. I looked up from the page, my whole face going hot, and found King Sigurd watching me with an expression of careful, contained attention that made my stomach drop entirely. "Your Grace," I said, my voice not entirely steady, "I believe there may be some error. This appears to be, the construction here is the formal marriage proposal, and the name at the top of the letter, which I confess I had not looked at closely before beginning to read, is your own," he said. Yes, please continue, Mistress Isolde. I would very much like to hear the rest of it read properly. If you want to know why a king would go to the extraordinary trouble of writing a marriage proposal in a dead dialect, and then summon the one woman alive skilled enough to translate it, forcing her to read her own heart's answer aloud before she had any chance to prepare for it, then stay with me. Follow this one to the end. I believed, standing there with my whole face burning, that I had simply stumbled into the most mortifying professional error of my career. I would learn, before the hour was out, that there had been no error at all. I did not continue immediately. I want to be honest that my first instinct, standing in that private scribe's chamber with the king himself, watching me with a patience I found nearly unbearable, was to find the most dignified possible way to set the letter down, explain that clearly some clerical confusion had occurred, and remove myself from the room before either of us had to acknowledge what I had just read aloud. Your Grace, I said carefully, I don't understand why you would have this translated at all, if you already know what it says. You wrote it. You could simply have told me directly, in common speech, in considerably less time, and with considerably less, I gestured helplessly at the letter, at the whole absurd formality of the scene. Mortification, he had the grace, at least, to look faintly abashed at that, though not nearly as abashed as the situation warranted. I have tried, on several occasions over the past 2 months, to tell you directly, he admitted. I found, each time, that the words would not come. I am accustomed to commanding armies and settling border disputes, and presiding over a council of considerably more intimidating men than yourself, Mistress Isolde. And I discovered, entirely to my own surprise, that I could not manage a single plain sentence of my own feelings when I actually stood in front of you. So I did the only thing I know how to do well, which is put a difficult matter into careful, formal language, and let the form of it carry what I could not manage to say plainly. I chose the old dialect specifically because I knew you, and only you, could read it back to me properly. And I confess I did not think through, until this very moment, exactly how that would feel from your side of the page. You didn't think it through, I repeated, half laughing despite my own mortification, because the plain, earnest absurdity of it was somehow more endearing than infuriating, though I would not have admitted that easily in the moment. You wrote me a marriage proposal in a dead language specifically so I would have to translate my own heart back to myself, out loud, in front of your scribe. And it did not occur to you that this might be considerably more embarrassing for me than simply asking me over supper? I am beginning to understand that it did not occur to me at all, he said, with the particular sheepish honesty of a powerful man realizing, in real time, that his own cleverness had rather badly misjudged its target. I apologize entirely for the delivery, Mistress Isolde. I do not, however, apologize for the sentiment. Every word in that letter is true, however poorly I chose to arrange the telling of it. I stood there, with the letter still in my shaking hands, my whole face still burning, and I did the only thing left to do, which was finish reading it properly, my voice steadier now, though my heart was not. The letter, once I let myself actually hear the whole of it, rather than simply react to the mortification of the situation, was extraordinarily, disarmingly sincere, an account, in the old formal style, of 2 months of quiet, careful noticing. He had watched me at my translation work in the archives on the occasions our paths crossed there, had come to know, through careful indirect inquiry rather than any direct conversation, the particular stubborn devotion I brought to a difficult old text, the quiet satisfaction I took in solving a puzzle no one else in the territories could manage. He had, the letter confessed, in language considerably more eloquent than anything he had managed aloud in that room, fallen in love with a woman he had watched work for 2 months before he ever found the courage to actually speak to her as more than a passing acquaintance in a busy archive corridor. I finished the letter with my voice not entirely steady, and I set it down on Bran's writing table, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. I don't know how to answer a proposal that arrived through my own professional services, I said finally, half laughing despite everything. I have never once encountered guidance on the etiquette of that particular situation in any of my scholarly texts. Then perhaps, Sigurd said, with the first real ease I had seen in him since I began reading, you might simply answer it the ordinary way, in your own words, whichever language you prefer. I did not answer him that day. I want to be honest that I needed time to untangle the mortification of the delivery from the genuine, growing warmth I had felt reading his actual words, and I asked for that time, and he granted it without argument, which surprised me nearly as much as the letter itself had. Word of what had happened in that scribe's chamber spread through the fortress within days, as such things always do, and I found myself, over the following weeks, the subject of a curiosity I found deeply uncomfortable. The linguist who had translated her own proposal, a story that grew more embellished with every retelling, until half the household seemed to believe I had somehow orchestrated the whole scene myself for advancement. Master Renwick, the court's senior linguist, a man who had held the Crown's official translation commission for nearly 2 decades, and who had, I would learn, badly wanted the honor of that particular royal request himself, found this rumor considerably more useful than he found it distasteful. He came to me in the archive corridor a week later, all smooth, wounded professional courtesy. I understand congratulations may be in order, he said, with a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Though I confess I find the whole matter rather curious, professionally speaking. The old dialect is a demanding one, Mistress Isolde, prone to considerable ambiguity in less experienced hands. One wonders whether a translator, eager to please a king and perhaps not entirely disinterested in the outcome, might render an ambiguous phrase rather more favorably than a strictly disinterested scholar would. His voice was warm, careful, and underneath it, plainly resentful. I do not say this to accuse you of anything, of course. Only to observe that a king's affections, once publicly declared through so unusual a channel, deserve rather more rigorous verification than the word of the one translator who stood to benefit most from a generous reading. I understood, hearing it, exactly what he was building toward, and exactly how much genuine expertise he was prepared to weaponize out of simple wounded professional pride, and I felt the first cold edge of real alarm. Because a challenge to my scholarship, unlike a challenge to my heart, was a thing I could not simply wait out patiently. I told Sigurd of the conversation that same evening, and I watched his easy warmth harden into something considerably more focused. He wanted the commission, Sigurd said slowly. I passed him over deliberately, because I know his work, and it is competent but never precise, and I needed precision for this particular letter more than I have ever needed it for any treaty. He has nursed that slight for a week, and now he intends to use it to suggest you fabricated my own proposal for advancement. His jaw had gone tight. That is not merely an insult to your scholarship, Isolde. It is an insult to the truth of every word I actually wrote. That was the moment my flustered, mortified deflection. This is clearly some kind of mistake. I'll finish the translation and forget I ever read it. Hardened into something entirely different. Because I understood that Master Renwick's wounded pride threatened not merely my reputation, but the plain, sincere truth of a letter I had, somewhere in the past weeks, come to genuinely treasure. Then let him make his challenge properly, I said, in front of the court, with the letter itself as evidence, and my own scholarship laid open to whatever scrutiny he thinks it deserves. I would rather defend the truth of that translation publicly than let a jealous man's wounded pride quietly poison what actually happened between us. Master Renwick, sensing an opportunity to discredit me formally rather than through mere corridor whispers, petitioned the king directly for exactly that. A public verification before the full court. The original letter examined by a panel of scholars. My own translation compared line by line against what he clearly hoped would prove a self-serving embellishment rather than a faithful rendering. It was, in its way, exactly the confrontation I had asked for, and exactly the one that landed me. 3 days later, standing before the full court with the king's letter shaking in my own hands. Reading it aloud a second time before a considerably larger and considerably more skeptical audience than Brand's quiet scribe's chamber had ever held, I read the whole of it again, slowly, precisely, pausing where the old dialects grammar required careful unpacking, explaining each construction as I went, so that any scholar in that hall could follow my reasoning and check it against the original text laid open beside me. Master Renwick, seated among the panel of reviewing scholars, interrupted twice with pointed, technical objections, each one designed to suggest I had softened or embellished a particular phrase, and each one, when I answered it with the same careful precision I brought to every commission, fell apart under its own scrutiny, because I had translated that letter with more care than I had ever given any text in my whole career. Precisely because I had understood, even in my first mortified reading of it, exactly how much it mattered to get every word right. By the third objection, even the other scholars on the reviewing panel had begun exchanging glances that made plain whose scholarship they actually doubted, and it was not mine. That is the moment I began this story with. Though I have told it slightly out of its proper order, the letter nearly finished, my voice steadier now than it had been at the start, the whole hall watching, and King Sigurd, having listened to the entire humiliating public dissection of his own private words without once losing his composure, finally rising from his seat. "Master Renwick," he said, "you have spent 3 attempts now trying to prove that Mistress Isolde's translation flatters me more than the truth allows. I wrote that letter myself. I know precisely what it says, in a dialect I studied for 2 months specifically, so I could be certain no one but the one translator fluent enough to render it faithfully could soften a single word of it for my benefit. Every objection you have raised, she has answered with more precision than you yourself demonstrated in your own review. I begin to suspect your challenge was never truly about her scholarship at all." "Your Grace," Renwick began, "I only meant to ensure. You meant to punish a woman for a commission you wanted for yourself," Sigurd said, and his voice filled that hall to the rafters, "by suggesting, in front of the entire court, that she fabricated the truest thing I have ever written. I will not have my own sincerity used as a weapon against the one person who translated it faithfully enough to embarrass me thoroughly in the process." His eyes were hard. "You are removed from the Crown's Translation Commission, effective today, and you will make a public apology to Mistress Isolde before this court adjourns, for questioning the integrity of scholarship considerably more rigorous than your own has proven to be." Master Renwick's challenge collapsed entirely under its own weight, his own technical objections having done more to expose his resentment than my translation ever could have exposed a flaw. And he was removed from his long-held commission within the hour, his public apology delivered with considerably less grace than the situation demanded. Though I found, once the fear had passed, that I did not particularly need it to be gracious. I needed it to be honest, and it was, at least, that Sigurd came down from the dais once the chamber had settled, and knelt at my feet in front of the whole recovering court, his wolf pressing warm against my skirts, as though it had been waiting the entire proceeding for exactly this moment. "I asked you to translate a proposal because I could not find the courage to say the words myself," he said, "and I did not think through, until it was already happening, how mortifying that delivery would be for you. I am sorry for the method, Isolde, even now. I am not sorry, and never will be, for a single word of what that letter actually said." He took my still trembling hand. You have now defended the truth of it twice. Once against your own instinct to flee the mortification, and once against a jealous man's deliberate attempt to poison it. I do not think I could ask for stronger proof that the sentiment was worth the awkwardness of how I delivered it. Will you answer it now, properly, in whatever language you prefer, in front of witnesses who have already heard every word of the question? I stood in that hall with the letter still faintly trembling in my other hand, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do, which is tell the truth. I was 3 sentences into that letter, I said, and the whole recovering court leaned in to hear the linguist answer the king. Before I realized, I should have stopped reading. I have never been more mortified in my entire professional life, and I want that recorded plainly, because I intend to remind you of it for the rest of our lives together. I let him see me smile, despite everything. But I finished it anyway, because some part of me already suspected, even through the mortification, that I did not actually want to stop. So, yes, Your Grace, I accept your extremely, unnecessarily complicated proposal, and I would like it understood, for the historical record, that any future proposals in this household will be delivered in plain common speech, over supper, like reasonable people. He laughed, a real, unguarded sound, the whole hall's tension finally breaking with it, and kissed me then, one breath, no more. A kiss that said a whole sentence and did not need to become a scene. And what broke open in me was not the thing the songs promise. It was recognition, plain and total, and considerably more amused than the songs usually allow for. The vertigo of being loved by a man whose cleverness had very nearly undone itself entirely, and who had somehow, despite that, managed to say something true enough to survive his own terrible delivery. His wolf pushed its great head between us, thoroughly delighted, and the court that had gathered to watch a scholarly challenge collapse watched instead the strongest wolf alive claim. At long last, the one translator clever enough to read her own heart back to herself, and brave enough to answer it anyway. Here is the part I kept for last. The blue wax. Sigurd had commissioned that unusual deep blue seal specifically for the one letter, he told me later, wanting some small mark of the occasion's particular strangeness to set it apart from every ordinary royal document. We have used it for nothing else since, except for our own private correspondence, and every letter we have exchanged in the year since, considerably less mortifying ones, written in plain common speech, exactly as I insisted, bears that same deep blue seal, a small private joke between us that the whole court has, by now, learned to recognize and, I suspect, quietly find rather sweet. A year on, I am the Luna of the Iron Territories, which still strikes me as a fortune too large for a scholar who once measured her whole worth in how faithfully she could render a dead language back to life. I still translate, by my own insistence, though I have grown considerably more careful, since my marriage, about which royal commissions I accept without asking a few pointed questions first about exactly what I am being asked to read. A letter came last week from Master Renwick's own modest household, where he has continued a quieter, considerably humbler practice since his removal from the Crown's commission, inquiring whether the Luna might consider recommending his services for lesser archival work, given how thoroughly his own pride had cost him. I had Bran write the reply, since I find I prefer, these days, to leave certain correspondence to a scribe with rather steadier nerves than my own where old grievances are concerned. I did not gloat. Gloating and grace wear the same coat, in my experience, and it is hard to tell them apart from a distance, easier up close, where you can see which one is smiling. I confirmed I bore him no lasting ill will, and recommended him for modest archival work well within his actual abilities, and added that I hoped he had learned, at some cost, the particular danger of doubting a scholar's precision simply because her conclusion proved inconvenient to his own ambitions. Sigurd found me sealing that letter at his own table, in the seat at his right hand, his wolf a warm weight across both our feet, the deep blue wax cooling beneath my own careful hand. "What are you telling him?" the king asked. "The truth," I said. That I was 3 sentences in before I realized I should have stopped reading. I pressed the seal, watching the wax settle into its familiar, unusual blue. Though I've decided, in the year since, that I'm rather glad I kept going. It turns out the most mortifying afternoon of my professional life was also, without question, the finest sentence I ever translated. So before I let you go, tell me what you think, because I have turned it over for a year, and I still cannot fully decide. Do you believe he chose that dead dialect purely out of cowardice, unable to find the plain words any other way? Or do you think some part of him understood, even then, that the only way to properly court a woman who lived entirely inside careful old languages was to speak to her in exactly the tongue she loved best, however badly he misjudged the delivery? Tell me your theory below. I have decided, in the end, that either answer makes for an excellent story to tell at our own table for the rest of our lives. And if you want to stay with us, the blue wax on every private letter since, the archive corridor where it all began. Whatever next impossibly complicated way this king finds to say something simple, comment the wolf and follow along, because I have learned that even the most disastrously delivered truth is still, in the end, a truth worth keeping. Where are you listening from tonight? Come sit in the archive with me. I promise, whatever language you need translated, I will read it to you properly this time, from the very first sentence,